Hello, everyone. My name's Eric Fett. I'm the Executive Director of Netroots Nation. I want to thank you all for joining us. This marks the start of our 18th year for Netroots Nation. We definitely appreciate Lush partnering with us to bring this free webinar to everyone on an important topic, which I'll let them get into in a minute. I'll be dropping into the chat some links about some other upcoming events we have if you're interested in checking out more about what Netroots Nation is about. As attendees, if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A to ask your questions of the panelists. If you want to introduce yourselves or talk among yourselves, please feel free to use the chat. I look forward to hearing the discussion, and I'm going to turn it over to Seth. Thank you all very much.
All right, everybody. Hi, thanks so much for being here. I'm going to pull up my screen to just get us started. If folks can see that, okay. So today we're gonna have a great session for you all. We have our last speaker on the way, so Kamal will jump in when he can. But just to give a brief overview, I'm gonna introduce myself, talk a little bit about what our session is, why we're here together today, introduce all of our panelists who will each then kind of respond to a question as to their role and their organization's role in this movement space. And then we'll wrap it up with actions for folks to take away from the session, right? What we want everybody to learn and bring with them out into the world, and have some time, to take your questions from the chat, like Eric said, in the Q&A area. So really grateful for you all for being here. So I'm Seth Laxman. I use he, him pronouns. Talking to you all today from Lenape land, also known as Brooklyn in New York City. I work for Lush Cosmetics as the advocacy campaigner in North America, which means that my job is basically to bring the activism that the business does into our stores in the US and Canada. So here are our fantastic speakers today. First, we have David McKean, who is the Executive Director of the International Corporate Accountability Roundtable, which works to ensure reasonable safeguards against corporate abuse, protect those who speak out against corporate abuse, and combat the rise of the corporate state. Next, we've got Rolf Scar, who's the Campaign Director at Greenpeace USA, and is working a lot right now on their work regarding SLAPP suits and protecting the right to protest and free speech and the relationship between a strong democracy and climate action. We'll have Kamal Franklin, who's the founder of Community Movement Builders, an organizing collective based in Atlanta. He's been an organizer for over 30 years, working in areas including youth organizing, police misconduct, and the development of sustainable urban communities. And finally, last but not least, we have Annabelle Lee McShane Bickford, who is the Senior Director of Private Sector Policy at Global Citizen. She directs strategy and policy outreach across international campaigns and leads policy engagement with numerous Fortune 500 companies from the C-suite to the working team level. So why are we here? You probably know Lush for the smell in your mall and the glitter that gets everywhere when someone brings one of our products into your space. But campaigning has always been a big part of the business's DNA. And through our advocacy and activism, we work in solidarity with movements around the world, spanning issues from banning animal testing to the freedom of movement, climate justice, and defending the freedom to read. We are so honored to have been invited into this work to learn about this grave threat to our democracy and social movements, which is the threat of SLAPP suits. We feel really strongly as a business that the private sector has the responsibility to stand for justice and freedom and to reject any of the mechanisms that weaken our democracy, rather than, like what we'll talk about today, undermining our democracy and freedoms. So we're here right now because the risk for our movement is really severe. Between 2012 and 2022, almost 2,000 land and environmental defenders have been killed around the world. frontline activists have been facing unprecedented charges for peaceful protest, and key movement organizations are fielding outrageous lawsuits. But despite the chilling effect that results from the violence and legal attacks carried out by corporate interests in the US and beyond, the essential advocacy from land and water defenders and other progressive activists continue, really strongly. So as a campaigning company, we, as Lush, as a business, really wanted to convene this panel and foster this discussion because we believe in the right to protest. We believe in nonviolent direct action, and we believe in the immense strength that comes from speaking truth to power. And we really know that now, right, and really in the lead up to one of the most important elections of our lives, that we need to face these attacks from our movement head on. So really, again, thank you so much for being with here to dive into this, frankly, terrible world of SLAPP suits. And we're going to start off with David, hoping that you can, share with us what is a SLAPP suit first, and then what is the equivalent for an individual.
Yeah, thanks so much, Seth. Yeah, this is such an important topic because it's, I think it's something that every activist, everybody who's engaged in direct action or any form of dissent or protest, whether it's as part of an NGO or as part of your local community organizing, really needs to be thinking about and really needs to have kind of front and center, both when you're planning things and when you're engaged in the type of work that I think many of the attendees here today, certainly those of us on this panel, are working on a regular basis. SLAPP suits, it's kind of a cute acronym, strategic lawsuits against public participation. It's basically, it's an attack. It's it has a legal sounding name, and it takes place in a courtroom, but there's no other way to look at it but that it's an attack. Basically, what a strategic lawsuit against public participation does, what a SLAPP does, is it moves an attack out of off the streets or out of the court of public opinion, and it moves it into the courtroom, and it seeks to silence people who are speaking up. And it does that in a few ways, and I'm going to get into those kind of briefly here. Essentially, what a SLAPP lawsuit seeks to do is it seeks to take all of the parts of the judicial system that those of us who are engaged in progressive change, fought really hard for, the kind of slow, deliberative, fact-based, and legal-based assessment of what's right and what's wrong, and it turns those into a weapon. And it allows the SLAPP filer, the person who files the SLAPP lawsuit, to bring a case against an activist or against an organization, and use the courtroom as a way to punish them. And it does that through forcing the person or the organization who's engaged in constitutionally protected freedom of speech or freedom of expression, association, public assembly, people who are doing things that they're allowed and constitutionally protected to do, and it says that those activities shouldn't be allowed, that they're somehow doing something that's wrong, and that they should have to engage in a lengthy, expensive, invasive judicial process to justify their right to do what they're constitutionally protected to do. These cases are baseless. They have no merit. The people who file them know that they are not going to win in the end. But the filing of them and the process of them and the expense of them and the emotional toll of them are the point. The point isn't to eventually get a judgment. There's no basis for these cases that would lead to a judgment, but they are effective because they're, especially when you're talking about individuals or when you're talking about small organizations and even large organizations, you're talking about the threat of potentially existential damages You're talking about needing to be in a judicial proceeding where your time and attention and your resources are diverted from undertaking your the core work that you were focused on, and instead you're focused on fighting a lawsuit. And then, in addition to all of those things, if the lawsuit proceeds, you're in a lengthy period of what's called discovery, where you're producing documents, where the company or the individual who filed the SLAPP suit is getting to take a look at your donor lists or other internal organizational or organizing documents, and really seeking to kind of tear the organization or the movement apart from the inside. And it's an incredibly pernicious attack. Even when organizations eventually prevail, they've undergone something that was really trying, and they're just a very dangerous thing that we need to be focused on and paying attention to and setting up protections for, because we're working in a space where the stakes are really high, and we're starting to make some excellent progress. And when that's the case, whether it be companies or individuals start to resort to anything that they can think of, and SLAPP lawsuits are certainly an avenue that we've seen where more and more folks have been turning. And certainly we're going to hear from Greenpeace in just a moment, which is facing a SLAPP suit of their own. But the bottom line takeaway is that these are basically manufactured lawsuits that have no basis in the actual merits of the case, but are meant to take the kind of slow, deliberate judicial process that in every other instance we really appreciate about the legal system, turn that into a weapon, make folks spend lots of time, resources in court, and for those folks who aren't the actual target of a SLAPP suit, the actual defendants, the goal of a SLAPP suit is to scare everybody else away from a space, and to send a signal that this is a dangerous place to be organizing, a dangerous place to be engaged in activism. You should stay away. You shouldn't sign your name onto letters. You shouldn't come out into the streets. You shouldn't, join an organization because you might end up on the wrong side of a lawsuit. And that's a really sinister way of thinking about how to use the law. And so there's a few really important things that we can do to protect ourselves and to set up a legal structure that is protective. And maybe I'll have a chance to get into that towards the end of this panel. But as we are talking through these things, and I think as Rolf at Greenpeace will speak to, it's important to remember that what we're talking about here is essentially an attack like you would expect to see in any other. It's not as direct as an attack in the streets. It's not an act of physical violence per se, but it's definitely a way of seeking to silence dissent and protests in a way that is in a way that they can achieve through winning the argument on its merits, and so they seek to silence instead through the courts.
Thank you so much, David. That's, really helpful, laying the groundwork and getting a definition and sort of, the beginning of our understanding of the strategy behind these attacks. So would love to pass it to you, Rolf, to discuss, what is Greenpeace USA currently facing? Maybe you talk a little bit about the first SLAPP suit and your role in that, and then hopefully, work that all into what does this mean for the wider movement, right? The outcomes of these, two examples that you'll speak to.
Yes, thanks, Seth. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I can't see your faces, but I appreciate all the messages in the chat, and thanks for taking time to sit in and learn more about this important issue, because it deserves not only robust legal defense in court, but it deserves a movement response. So everyone has a role to play in pushing back against this corporate overreach and this corporate attacks. I'll start by saying, hi, I'm Rolf. I'm the campaigns director at Greenpeace USA. So I oversee our main advocacy campaigns on climate, on democracy, saving our oceans, etc. But I'm also a SLAPP survivor. I was personally named in a large lawsuit from a Canadian logging company in 2016. It was the first of these two large SLAPP suits that were filed against us. And they were SLAPP suits sort of on steroids. And what I mean by that is both of these suits, the one that I survived, we defended ourselves in court. We ended up settling that case just recently after about 7 or 8 years. Started with the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act RICO charges. So these lawsuits were alleging that our advocacy and our speech were equivalent to organized crime activity. Not just saying they're illegal, which is unconstitutional, of course, but saying that they are at the level of the mafia, international criminal syndicate stuff. And so luckily, both these cases, the RICO claims were thrown out of court. And although these threats are getting worse, I just want to recognize that because we defeated the RICO claims, both in this Canadian logging company case, Resolute Forest Products, and in the second case, Energy Transfer, the company behind the Dakota Access Pipeline, we've got a big win to celebrate because we haven't seen RICO being used in SLAPP cases since then. And we have now good legal precedent that discourages the use of RICO as a weapon against advocacy and organizing in this country. But unfortunately, the Energy Transfer case didn't end with the dismissal of those federal RICO charges. The company quickly repackaged the case and refiled in North Dakota State Court, North Dakota being the place where that amazing resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline manifested back in 2016 and 2017. So even though the RICO claims were thrown out, we still face a $300 million lawsuit in North Dakota State Court where Energy Transfer is alleging that it was Greenpeace that actually orchestrated the entire resistance at Standing Rock, which is both unbelievable and frankly racist, an attempt to rewrite the indigenous resistance that happened there. Couple top lines. What's the difference between this case and the Resolute case or the other cases that are brought against Greenpeace? Sometimes I get questions like, you all get in trouble all the time. What's the difference? Well, the difference is this is actually going to a jury trial that's scheduled for the end of July and is scheduled to wrap up by the end of August. So the previous case I mentioned, the Resolute one that I was personally named in, that was adjudicated by a judge, never made it to a jury trial. So we are facing a jury in Morton County, North Dakota, where we're not so sure that folks can be unbiased against Greenpeace and against those who participated in resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline and Standing Rock. So it changes the dynamic there, and the outcome is uncertain. And the cost, they're asking for $300 million, but the judge has granted punitive damages. So it could be $500 million or more. And of course, Greenpeace is a fairly large NGO, but we don't have that kind of money. It could put us at risk of financial risk, at least, of being wiped out. And so the urgency for you to stand with us is great now, because what we want to do is demonstrate support and strength in the lead up to that. I want to mention a few reasons why this is an attack on Greenpeace, but also an attack on the movement. This isn't just a talking point that I'm offering to you to get you mobilized to help Greenpeace. Part of what they're alleging is defamation, things that we said that they're saying is illegal. There's a set of statements that we made that they say are defamatory. Now, none of these statements were original to Greenpeace. They were, for example, one example is a sign-on letter to banks that 500 other organizations signed on to. Maybe some of you all or your organization signed on to it. We didn't write the letter. We were one of the co-signatories. So what does it mean to criminalize the act of signing on to a letter to a bank pointing out important issues of public interest? If they set a legal precedent, and what they're trying to do is to say that sort of activity is illegal, and everyone should think twice before they act in solidarity to peacefully communicate with financial institutions. Another thing is that they directly attack statements of solidarity that we made with the Standing Rock Sioux and Indigenous water protectors. So we weren't saying that this land was the traditional or culturally important lands of the Standing Rock Sioux. We were saying that the Standing Rock Sioux said this, and we believe them, and that's why we care about this issue. What they're alleging is not only should we have known that that was wrong, but we should know that we should have not trusted the Standing Rock Sioux about their own traditional lands, culture, and heritage. Think about that. That we, not only was it wrong, like we could disagree about these things, but we should have known that we couldn't trust the Standing Rock Sioux about their own traditional lands and culture. So this is an enormous potential impact, of course, on all kinds of works. Stand up and fight for their rights to be fully recognized all over the world, not just in the US and Canada, South America, but all over the world. This is a threat to business as usual. It's a threat to the fossil fuel and other extractive industries, and they're taking this head on in some of these court cases. The other thing I'll mention is that they're trying to create a dangerous legal precedent around collective protest liability. Long story short, they're trying to argue that anyone engaged in a training, which is what Greenpeace did in part. We helped facilitate nonviolent direct action training, including de-escalation training, to keep things peaceful and allow people to protest with power peacefully on the ground. But because we did that, we should be held responsible for the actions of every person who cycled through Standing Rock. Over 100,000 people cycled through the protest area over the course of 2016, 2017. And even if some random person set fire to construction equipment, it's folks like Greenpeace, organizations like Greenpeace, that should be held responsible for the actions of third parties that we don't know, that we didn't have contact with, that you didn't invite, and frankly would disagree with. And there are similar attacks with the same concept going on in other courts in the US right now. The effect would be to basically criminalize organizing of events and activities and make people worry about, if they participated in a large mass demonstration, would they be held responsible for other people's actions? So we've been fighting these cases for 7-8 years, tooth and nail, because we know that our existence is at stake. But we're not just fighting for us. We're fighting because we know this case has huge implications for the movement. We need to show we need to show and demonstrate to companies like Energy Transfer that this is a losing tactic. You know, if SLAPPs are meant to silence us and weaken us, I call on you to help us demonstrate the opposite of silence. We need to be loud, we need to be proud, and we need to build power together. I'm going to put in the chat a few ways you can help us do that. We have a goal of getting 1 million people to sign on to an open letter standing in solidarity with Greenpeace and against this corporate SLAPP attack. Individuals can sign one letter. We want 1 million people around the world to sign that. And we're also organizing organizations on the same sign-on letter, but a separate form. And I'll share both of those in the chat. If you feel so inspired, I'd love to boost those numbers today and encourage you to share them with your networks as well, so that we can demonstrate to whoever is watching that we will not be silenced, we will not be weakened, and that the movement will only grow stronger in the face of these attacks.
Thanks so much, Ralph. That's, yeah, fantastic to hear both about the victories that Greenpeace has experienced over the course of these, 2 SLAPP suits, and then, why it's important for everybody, and that it's not just limited to one organization, right, being targeted. So would love now to transition. We've heard a lot about SLAPPs, and that's what you all came here for. It's what's in the title, but we have Kamau Franklin here with us from Community Movement Builders based out of Atlanta, and you all have been, organizing around a different land protection issue. And so, Kamau, would love to hear from you. How have attacks in the same realm as SLAPP suits been used against organizers in your community, and what impact has that had on your organizing, on your organization, both in Atlanta and beyond?
Yes, definitely. Thank you guys for inviting me to be here. And so we started organizing against the idea of Cop City, which is a militarized police training force, in 2021, a little bit after the George Floyd uprisings that happened, steep into COVID, but basically brought literally millions of people out of their homes to protest not only the murder of George Floyd, but Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta, and so many others. As we started to, over the year of that protest, started to sort of get information that the idea of Cop City, again, this militarized training police center, was about to be built. And we saw it as a reaction to the 2020 uprisings. We began to organize against that. And at the we being, a motley band of grassroots organizers, some anarchists, and other folks. So it was really steeply an Atlanta centric grassroots organizing effort at first. And as we kept organizing, first in traditional ways, town hall meetings, rallies, and demonstrations at City Hall, we would get the normal bust ups of the police interfering in our demonstrations, breaking them up, and some arrests. And so some of the early arrests were things like resisting arrest. Some of them were obstruction of governmental administration, things that as organizers and activists who we may defend against, but we were used to within the realm of having protest movements. As the city continued on with its plan to build Cop City, and as each endeavor, they felt that by passing the next thing, like they passed the lease to give the mayor permission to build Cop City, or to give the lease to the Atlanta Police Foundation, I should say, for them to build the institution. The city thought that the protest movement would go away. And as opposed to going away, the protest movement started to grow and take twists and turns. And as mentioned earlier, a lot of the organizing depended on direct action and civil disobedience. And part of that direct action and civil disobedience included people going into the forest and making camps in the forest and this is the forest that was scheduled to be cut down in order to build Cop City, a forest that we've dubbed Walani Forest. And there were direct actions that were happening. We were a diverse group. To be clear, we, in terms of the style of organizing, it was a flat structure. It was a leaderless group. And the things that we loosely had that kept us together was a diversity of tactics and no recrimination against other activists. And what I mean by that is, even if folks disagreed with the tactics and strategies used by one group of organizers or activists or collectives, we would not publicly be separated by either the police and or the media and or government administrations into good activists, bad activist camps. And so if a tow truck was burnt in protest of it being brought into the forest to cut down trees, whether or not people engaged in that action or not, we in solidarity would not come out against that action. And when the media would stick cameras in our face, we would not call those actions violent. We would disagree and say those were not violent actions. The violent actions are the over policing of our community and the subsequent targeting of activists and organizers who are trying to fight back against militarized policing. As we progress, the city, through the Atlanta Police Foundation, formed a task force. That task force included the Atlanta Police Department, the DeKalb County Police Department, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Homeland Security. That task force, through open records requests, we found out were starting to muse about the idea of bringing domestic terrorism charges to organizers and activists. And later on, we found out they were musing about bringing RICO charges. And so in December of 2022, there was a raid in the Walani Forest where people, again, who were sitting in tents, I want to be clear about this, who were sitting in tents were arrested in mass, about 20 people, and they were the first people charged with domestic terrorism. 1 month later, January 2023, the police again invaded the forest and arrested another 20 some odd people, or 15 to 20 some odd people, and then killed Taran Twitagita in the forest. And so Twitagita was the first environmental activist who has ever been killed in the United States by the police, and they were sitting in their tent. The police report attempted right away to criminalize Tortuguita and claimed that they were shooting at the police, that they were um, um, lobbying explosives and so forth and so on. But the autopsy showed that Tortuguita was sitting crisscross with hands in their face, palms turned outward, as gunshots rained down on them. So after that, there were more arrests on domestic terrorism charges. Again, they thought that this would end the movement, and as opposed to doing that, the movement still gained strength. We had several weeks of action and demonstrations that continued to push back and fight back. The state, I should say, the state of Georgia decided through the prosecutor's office to then go after a multitude of different organizers through RICO charges. And so we should be clear that both the people who are charged with domestic terrorism, approximately 42, and RICO charges, approximately 61, the overwhelming majority of these people have played little leadership role in the Cop City actions. I want to be clear. These are people who were arrested randomly, who, if they had an in-state ID, they were let go. And if they had an out-of-state ID, out of Georgia, they were mostly arrested because the narrative that the police and the prosecutor's office and the mayor of Atlanta were trying to push, that the opposition against Cop City were outside agitators. They invoked the language of Southern segregationists as cover for their actions of literally killing organizers and activists, but obviously criminalizing them. And so I will wrap up with this around how this has impacted our movement. The movement has kept going. The movement has continued to support the organizers and activists and the people who came to support stopping Cop City. But it has had a huge impact, of course, on people's lives, people's livelihood, their safety, their careers, even. And so the city and again, the state actors have pushed this narrative of criminalization when the vast majority of protests against Cop City, again, would be defined as standard protest actions. And the people who've been arrested have not necessarily been people who've been planning over and over again demonstrations. It's been people who have shown up, people who have come for a weekend event and who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The most targeted arrest out of all of this has been the Atlanta Bail Fund, where 3 members of the Atlanta Bail Fund have been charged with RICO charges. And the Atlanta Bail Fund itself has been targeted for having the individuals commit so-called white-collar crimes. This we see as a way to dismantle the very infrastructure of movement organizing. Bail funds have been around since the early 1900s. They've played a key role in movement organizing, particularly during the civil rights movement, when bail funds allowed everyday average people to participate, particularly in the Deep South, in protest movements, take arrests, get arrested, with the somewhat security of not having to spend a long period of time in Southern segregationist jails where they could literally be killed, raped, maimed, and brutalized. The fact that the state would target these individual bail funds is showing the length that they are going to stop dissent against police violence. The RICO charges in particular, and I really will wrap with this, they do not point to the day we started fighting against Cop City as the day the so-called criminal enterprise began. They clearly say in their indictment that the criminal enterprise that they are targeting began the day that George Floyd was murdered by the police officer. So they're saying the day that a movement was revitalized and organized against police violence and police militarization is the day in which a criminal enterprise was born. That is what the state is doing. That is what the city is doing. The right-wing Republican states led by a white governor with a so-called progressive Democratic black mayor are teaming together because when it comes to cops and capitalism, the forces agree mightily on stopping movements for justice and ending police violence. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Kamau. It's, yeah, a lot of important and heavy information. Really appreciate you sharing so much of the story so folks can really see clearly like how the situation has evolved, you know, so many connections to what Rolf spoke about of the different elements of this type of tactic that really attack the foundation of movement building. I see folks in the chat making connections to things that have happened, you know, in the history of our movements. How you compare it to, you know, lots of tactics, you know, by this small far right white supremacist faction reusing the same strategies, but with a new, you know, fancy coat of paint on it. But, you know, it's the same thing. So, you know, I think, like you said, it's important is sticking together and only growing, right? Like what Rolf said, getting loud instead of getting quiet. So Annabelle, would love now to transition to you both, you know, on one hand to hear what we all could do about this, but also hoping that you know, Global Citizen, you're an action platform, you have millions of users, you work with artists, corporate leaders, philanthropists, you know, with a number of really beautiful different goals like ending extreme poverty, defending the planet, and demanding equity. So would love to hear from you. How does the global part, right, fit into this? And then what is Global Citizen's role in this work of countering SLAPPs and protecting the right to protest?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Seth. And thank you to my fellow panelists. These are incredible case studies and obviously active kind of crisis. Global Citizen definitely wants to continue to support any way that we can on these specific cases. So thank you for sharing your stories. So for those of you that don't know, I just want to back up. Global Citizen is a large international advocacy organization focused on ending extreme poverty. We have a unique pop meets policy model where we bring together some of the world's biggest artists to campaign with us on critical issues ranging across the SDGs, all really trying to address the systemic issues that lead to extreme poverty. We have about 12 million global citizens that use our platform on a yearly basis to take action and take action. There's a kind of wide variety of ways that people can do that. And they're able to, through learning on our platform and taking action, they're able to earn tickets to these tentpole moments that we put on to build pressure campaigns at key moments, to apply pressure to the private sector, to apply pressure to government officials to try to secure policy commitments on our key campaign goals. So, for example, during UNGA every September, we have about 60,000 people come to Central Park to see, you know, incredible artists, but also to learn more about these issues. And everyone has to take action to get into it. We don't charge for tickets. So I wanted to lay that out at the jump, just to explain why we've gotten involved in this work on SLAPPs. We're in the business of encouraging more people to be activists. We believe that the only way that we're going to end extreme poverty and defend the planet is if people can speak out and make change within their communities, and wherever jurisdiction where, you know, they think that that change needs to be made. So working on the issue of civic space and protecting freedom of speech and basic civic rights is, you know, goes hand in hand with our mission of encouraging people we're not going to see the change that we need to see if people are afraid of legal reprisals, or as many of the other speakers discussed, it's a real chilling effect, and that can isn't just speaking out on social media. That's people feeling uneasy about voting. That's people feeling uneasy about writing politicians. It has a real ripple effect across different ways that people can take action. So Global Citizen is super proud to have partnered for the past 2 years with organizations like ICAR, Earth Rights International. Greenpeace has been a core partner on this, to try to specifically target the private sector, to get them to, and I can go through a little more detail on the pledge in a second, but ultimately to get them to commit to not to engaging in SLAPP lawsuits. This came about, I was working closely with my colleague who leads on the civic space pillar, and as part of my job, leading all the corporate advocacy, trying to really understand where's the place where we can really move the needle and use our platform to move the needle on an issue that that the private sector is involved in. So SLAPPs is something that I've followed for a long time in my career in the business and human rights space. So I wanted to try to take it on. It felt like a good moment with legislation, bubbling up, and more information, out there about this issue that I consider historically a pretty wonky human rights issue that we all care about, but not that many people know about. And Global Citizen has built this incredible communications platform. We have, we're 5 million social media followers throughout our platform. So it's a way to really tap into people around the world that care about these issues, to encourage them to learn more on SLAPPs. So just on an action that we ran through our platform, we had over 60,000 people around the world take a quiz just to begin to learn about SLAPPs, and then they can go into the next level and understand where legislation might be happening, where they live, where they can push for more of that. We had Representative Raskin on our stage in Central Park announce SLAPP legislation. So we've really tried to create this surround sound campaign to both encourage everyday people to understand more and how this affects them, and how it, this chilling effect that we speak about, but also to use our platform to get companies to make this commitment to sign the anti-SLAPP pledge, and then using our platform to highlight that commitment. And this really came about when the UN Guiding Principles kind of 10-year look back report had zeroed in on SLAPPs specifically as a major concern for the human rights movement. But in the section called Outcomes We Need to See, it was around how companies that aren't partaking in SLAPPs, companies that are not engaging those, really need to step up and pressure their business networks and their suppliers and organizations that engage in their supply chain to not partake in SLAPP. So it felt like it aligned with some international policy recommendations, and it felt like a good moment to do this, and we found the right partners. So this is a campaign that we're really proud of. I'm happy to just touch a little bit on the business case, Seth, if that makes sense. Just to, I encourage everyone that is not a corporation that is engaging in SLAPPs, or a corporation that is engaging in SLAPPs, to take action through our platform. That's a way that everyday individuals can do that. If you're a company that happens to be on the call that's engaging in SLAPPs, or would like to make sure that you're not, please reach out to us to sign this private sector anti-SLAPP pledge. Those are clear asks. We will highlight you, as I said, in Central Park, and also throughout our commitments and impact press release that goes out, that has all of the names of the artists attached to it, that gets a lot of international play. So maybe just kind of stating, the obvious here is that companies, as part of their commitment to the UN Guiding Principles in Business and Human Rights, should not engage in SLAPPs. It is a violation of that commitment, and to respect human rights in your supply chain. So that's like the top reason in many ways. Also, it's just bad. It's a bad bet in terms of reputational risk. People see slaps as bullying tactics. It can lead, for consumers that you care about, to wonder what else is going on behind the hood. It can backfire when you try to suppress information and cause more people to want to know what's going on in operations that might cause you to engage in a tactic like a slap. Investors are increasingly caring about human rights risks in companies that they invest in. If you're on the record having multiple slaps, that is a cause for concern for investors that are taking these kind of long-term risks around human rights seriously. As we've heard a bit about, there is more legislation coming, both in the U.S. And pending legislation in different places around the world that could incur financial risks around fines. But sadly, a lot of the companies, and I'm sure my other colleagues on the call can speak to the fact that many companies sadly build this into their budget. They can take the hit. And it's worth, it's worth the silencing that they, try to do through the slaps. And then lastly, and this is not exhaustive, but it really, for companies that in this day and age, everybody wants to make sure that they're seen to be an upstanding corporate citizen, a company that takes seriously issues around sustainability and human rights. And there's a lot of people in the market that care about these things. And as if you're seen and you get that label as a bad company, that will, long-term damage to the trust that you're trying to build with consumers. So I'll pause there, but those are all the kind of key points that I wanted to hit.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Annabelle. Really, appreciate that. And you brought us right into my last slide for us all, where, going to go back through with you, quick round robin for each of our speakers to share, what is the one, action or one thing you want folks to remember and take, back with them into their life as an advocate, into their community, into their workplace, if that applies. And so Annabelle, we'll come back to you in a second, but David first, I was hoping you could speak to what is the way that we can address the root cause of this? Annabelle referred to some legislation. What is the one thing in that world you want people to know?
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think this has been such a great panel. Annabelle mentioned federal anti-SLAPP legislation. This is an effort, basically, as I mentioned, there's so much about the structures of the legal system that are valuable and worth preserving. When it comes to this specific type of use of the legal system, this weaponization of the legal system, these are cases that are worth keeping out of court. And there are a small number of cases relative to all the things that happen in, courts across the country, but they are worth taking special note of and providing a special way of handling, giving judges the tools to handle these quickly and to limit the damage that these cases can have on the SLAPP defendant. So we're very proud that over the course of several years, we've negotiated a piece of bipartisan legislation introduced by, as Annabelle mentioned, Jamie Raskin in the last Congress. We're looking to introduce it again in this Congress very soon, that would provide for basically a special mechanism of dealing with these cases and getting them out of court quickly and with as little damage to the SLAPP victim as possible. It builds on the legislation that many states have passed. There's a number of anti-SLAPP laws in various states. If you're in your state, in a state around the country, and you want to check whether you have an anti-SLAPP law, there's resources online to do that. I can put some in the chat. If you don't have an anti-SLAPP law in your state, or it's a weak anti-SLAPP law, I would love to connect with you and talk about how we can support you in strengthening your state to have a stronger anti-SLAPP law. Because as Rolf mentioned, North Dakota, there's a reason that ETP has filed back in North Dakota State Court. They do not have an anti-SLAPP law. They are not a place that is looking or has yet demonstrated an interest in looking to protect folks from this type of lawsuit. But with that said, every state that has passed an anti-SLAPP law has done so unanimously. It's a relatively nonpartisan issue, and so there's nothing politically partisan about valuing freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and freedom of association, and that's something that we would like to maintain, that this is fundamental to our democracy, fundamental to our way of engaging in our political system, and not partisan. So if you're interested in finding out more about whether either federal anti-SLAPP legislation or state level anti-SLAPP legislation, would love to connect with folks outside of this conversation.
Excellent. Thanks so much, David. Hope folks take you up on that offer and get involved. Quickly, Annabelle, want to go back to you. You said a few things of what corporations shouldn't do, right? But maybe is there something that you can share that the private sector should be doing to support the right to free speech and protest, right? Like, sure, they can stop being bad, but what can the private sector do to be good?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that tone from the top is a term used. I think that executive teams should make it clear that they respect their employees' rights to free speech. Give a day off for voting. If that's an option, I think most companies should do that. And take opportunities like the one that we have presented to use your voice. Companies have outsized power on a variety of issues in the political sphere. That's kind of what I think brought me into this work, recognizing that they have more power and money than many countries these days. Take the opportunity to stick your head above the parapet and show that your company respects human rights and that you expect that of those in your supply chain. So be brave, especially I know right now, working with companies, for those of you on the call that, are doing that, going into election year, it's very hard to get companies to speak out on literally anything. So I would encourage them to be brave and to encourage the companies in your network to be brave on issues like this, to use your voice and to speak up publicly.
Be brave. Thank you so much, Annabelle. That's fantastic. Kamal, what would you like to share, to wrap up your work, bring people in to, is there a current call to action related to Cop City that you want people to plug into? What should folks take away?
I think folks should take away that Cop City is no anomaly, or that we shouldn't treat it as some individualized issue that's not really connected to the larger way in which the state works. The militarism of the police is connected to the military of the United States. It's connected to the genocide that we see happening in Palestine, that these issues are interconnected, and that further, we shouldn't suspect that the very state that does these things to us will ultimately do what it can to, let's say, to help support our movement work. I think whether Democrat or Republican, we have to see that these parties are basically working in the interest of private capital, private corporations, and that is their main concern. And the rest of us are disposable. And as long as we are buying brands online, engaging in commerce, then we are good citizens. But the moment we engage in the act of protesting or demanding to have a say in government and how resources are run, or the moment we become the enemy of corporate and political leaders who do their bidding. And so I think people need to remember that, not be soft on these political leaders, but to really fight hard and to understand the interconnectedness of police violence and militarism and capitalism around the world.
Thank you so much, Kamal. Yeah, really important to bring it all together and see the intersectionality and interconnectedness of this all so that we can really get at the root causes. Before I pass it to you, Rolf, to try this out, I see we're really running up against our time, so sadly not sure if we'll have time for many questions, but not seeing any like a large quantity. So I think we're good there, but just to put it out there for folks, reach out if other things come up, if you want support or more resources. Thank you for joining us. Rolf, what should people know? You're going up to trial. What can we do? There's a few QR codes on the screen, but
Yeah,
what does it mean?
2 months. We've got 2 months left until we go to this jury trial in Morton County, North Dakota. We've been fighting this for 7 years. Now's the time, if you can, to stand with us and to demonstrate that we will not be silenced. So the big QR code with the big G in it, that's the individual sign on, and we want to get to 1 million. So if you sign it, you'll get us one closer to that. And if you share it with your networks, we'll get a lot closer to that. In the chat, I'm going to put the organizational sign-on letter. These are relatively new things. We've emerged from the discovery process and everything else, and now it's time to make some noise. And so we've got a couple hundred organizations of all sorts, faith centers, labor groups, environmental NGOs, and others, seeing common cause in this fight, because this attack truly is an attack on the movement, not just on Greenpeace. So welcome your organization, if you represent an organization and can get to someone who can sign off to join us in both of those ways. It means a lot, and you'll have a chance to stay updated as we look at trial this summer.
Wonderful. I'll also call out on the left, the QR code is a great report from Greenpeace that dives into more detail on this issue if you want some further learning. We've got 2 minutes, so I'll say if there's some rapid fire questions people want to throw in the chat before everybody leaves at the top of the hour. Cynthia, I see your question about privacy on social media. I think that's a fantastic question. I think perhaps a little bit out of scope for what I had asked our panelists to prepare for this panel, but maybe if anyone wants to jump in and quickly answer while we see if other folks have things they want to put forward.
I'll just note quickly that it is a concern. I mean, certainly we saw SLAPP suits from a former member of Congress, Devin Nunes, against a like parody Twitter account run by a person purporting to be Devin Nunes's cow. The issue was whether or not he was, had the real farming background that he claimed. It was a silly, funny account, and the person was anonymous, and Devin Nunes tried to compel Twitter to reveal who this person was with the clear intent of going after them. There's lots of instances of companies filing defamation suits against people who write, fact-based reviews online, things like that. So there's absolutely legitimate digital privacy concerns, and I'm not sure if the question was about something. The question is about, kind of digital security for activism and things like that. But certainly your digital footprint on the internet is something to be aware of when we're talking about SLAPP suits.
Right, we're at our hour, so really just want to say a huge heartfelt thank you to our panelists for joining us today. Really, grateful for your time and your work on this and sharing it with us all. Thank you to Netroots. Thank you to Eric for having us and making sure we all had all of our things to get this together. Well, the recording will be out. Hope you share it with your networks. Hope you take action with us today and stay connected. A lot of good work going on and a big need to protect ourselves and others. So thanks, everybody.